World where violence forces thousands of families to flee for their lives each day, the United Nations seeks to bring attention to the world that the global public stands with refugees. On World Refugee Day, held every year on June the 20th, the UN commemorates the strength, courage and perseverance of more than 22 million refugees. VOA's Zlati Tsahok has our report.
In the past few years, many people fled Syria because they came under attack by one of the sides in the 6-year civil war, or by Islamic State militants who took power in the country's northeast. Islamic State has been losing territory and power in recent months, but people who have fled the terrorists are not sure they can go back.
If the security situation does not calm down, we won't go back. Where would we live? How could we eat and drink? Those who lost their houses can't work or have big families. What would they go back to do?
Many of the refugees live in UN-operated tent cities while they await resettlement to a third country. Jordan, a country of 10 million people, is home to almost 700,000 refugees. Some of them are victims of torture and abuse. An international group of lawyers is helping 50 of the most vulnerable refugees in Jordan.
What I say to the client is, we will help you until you're self-supporting. We will help you until you're on your feet and able to take care of yourself. And that could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, it could be a life.
Refugees depend on public and private donations. As their numbers grow, the funds to support them become insufficient. The UN Refugee Agency has made repeated calls on the international community for more donations. It has now obtained permission from religious leaders in several Muslim countries, enabling their citizens to donate to refugee programs. Muslims are customarily expected to give alms to the state to help the poor. But now people in some oil-rich countries will be able to support refugee programs instead.
Through this program, the donations go 100% full and directly to the refugees and do not go through any cuts at all in comparison to other funding programs in UNHCR, where donations go through a 7% administrative tax for the sake of the organization.
But in a world where every minute nearly 20 people are forcibly displaced from their homes as a result of conflict or persecution, the need for support outpaces the supply. Zlati Tsahok, VOA News, Washington.
Well, for more on this World Refugee Day, I'm joined by Mark Yarnell. He's a senior advocate and UN liaison at Refugees International. Mark, welcome to Africa 54.
Thanks for having me.
Now, first, if we focus on Africa, where you pay a lot of attention to, what is the overall assessment of the refugee situation?
Well, globally, we're at an unprecedented time period where you have 65 million people displaced, about 22 million who have crossed borders, and the situation is particularly acute in Africa. The situation in South Sudan, where conflict has been ongoing for years, has caused nearly 1 million people to flood into Uganda. You have continuing violence, as you saw in Somalia, combined with drought, people fleeing into Kenya and Ethiopia, let alone ongoing crisis in Burundi. And in southern Congo, there's recently been about 30,000 Congolese have flooded into Uganda. So it's a region where both, there's serious conflict and also neighboring countries looking to provide support for those who are fleeing.
Yeah. A number of our viewers say that it appears that sometimes the world gets desensitized about the plight of people, particularly in Africa, including refugees. There's a little more attention paid to people in other parts of the world when they're in the same situation. What is your thought? Is it fatigue, or is it just that perhaps the value is a bit less on the continent?
It's a great question. I think that it depends on the situation. I think that that people, to be quite blunt, I mean, people get more connected to a situation where they feel they can relate to it. And so maybe when people in the Western world see people from Syria fleeing and they see someone a little more close to them culturally, they might feel a bit more empathy, whereas the disconnect from Africa, unfortunately, is there. But, in reality, I think that there's a great number of Africans who have resettled as refugees in the U.S., and a number of them who have gotten to know. And I think the more people here in America who can meet African refugees and to see all the good that they're doing now that they're here, I think that'll connect people to the continent more.
Yes. On this particular day, what is it you would like people to really think about as relates to refugees?
Well, you know, part of the focus of the day is certainly acknowledging the severity of the crisis, which we've talked about, and looking at where we can find solutions for areas that are continuing in conflict. But at the same time, it's acknowledging the positive things that are being done. So when you have a country like Uganda, which despite the incredible amount of people fleeing into its territory, keeps its borders open, maintains freedom of movement, and supports access to work. Ethiopia is doing a similar thing. Kenya has kept its borders open for decades. So I think that acknowledging the positive things that people are doing and trying to emulate that is important.
Globally, there has been a lot of talk about cuts to funding to the UN and other agencies that are, supporting refugees, especially from the United States. Why should the United States continue supporting and funding those organizations?
The U.S. is the richest country in the world, yet only spends about 1% of its budget on foreign aid. So it's still just a fraction of what we could spend. And now there's threats to that amount, which would have devastating impact in terms of support to refugees. But I think it's the fact that we're all in this together, that no one is born expecting to become a refugee. World events change and areas become destabilized. And I think that part of what's so, I think, encouraging in certain parts of Africa is that communities in DRC, for example, in Congo, are more than welcome to receive Burundians because they think that at some point maybe they'll be forced to flee into Burundi. So it's showing solidarity with the world and showing that we're all in this together.
We all need to feel empathy, and hopefully things will change for everybody so we can all live as free people. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, Mark Yarnell is a Senior Advocate and UN Liaison at Refugees International here in Washington. Now,